All right, for the next half hour, 45 minutes, we're talking football. We're talking the National Football League. We're talking college football. Welcome to week 2 of Behind the Point Spread. I'm Travis Justice, and over the next half hour, 45 minutes, we'll be taking your phone calls, taking your comments. Speaking of comments, if you have comments, go ahead and leave them in the comments section on YouTube and Facebook, and we'll get to as many as we can. We can't get to them all because, well, we already have, we're 30 seconds into this thing, have 182 people and growing watching. So we'll get to as many comments as we can. If you do want to call the show, if Scott Spreitzer says something that piques your interest, or Dr. Rob, you can always give us a call at 402-593-5556. Let's bring in the men of the hour. It would be our Vegas insider, Scott Spreitzer. And Scott, Dr. Rob never disappoints, does he? Look at his handle tonight. Doesn't put his name up, just puts Cordell was better than Shedeur. That's
facts. I think that's what the kids say these days.
Rob, have you been on the YouTube channel this week?
Comments are amazing.
Oh my God. We should start doing a Colorado podcast because Colorado fans they're very active when it comes to following their team. I didn't know Colorado had that many fans.
They've got 17 of them, and all 17 are commenting on the last show we did.
Scott, I mean, we do a podcast every week, right? I know you're an avid listener of the Doc Talk podcast, and, it ranges on YouTube and the audio, but this week's YouTube video podcast has been through the roof, and I would say most of it are Colorado fans. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I again, like Rob just said, I didn't know how that. I don't want to, listen. Colorado fans buy picks too. Okay, so I got to be a little careful. But, I can remember back in the Big 8 days and the early days of the Big 12 when half the stadium would be red in Boulder. So hey, it's good to see that they're vocal and they're reacting to these videos. I love it. And it's going to be really interesting to see which team recovers after whatever team loses this weekend in this game, because there's just so much hype behind it. It's either going to be, Dion, well, he's probably going to lose 7 or 8 games this year if they lose to the Huskers and, the honeymoon is way over, or it's going to be, all right, Nebraska went out there, all the hype this week. They've gotten some votes. They're, 26 to 32 in that range with the votes when it comes to top 25 voting. All this talk about Raiola and the Huskers are back based off a win over UTEP. This team, Nebraska, I mean, guys, they could be undefeated when they face Ohio State if they get past this game in Lincoln.
It's interesting. A lot of people are watching on Twitter tonight, and we are live on Twitter because Dr. Rob Scott finally has a blue check mark. Dr. Rob finally has a blue check mark.
Trav went sold out to Elon.
I didn't sell out to Elon.
He's giving Elon his $8.
Yeah. No, I paid for the whole year up front because I got a better deal.
I got $8 a month.
I got it for $7 a month because I was able to buy the whole year at once. So
got the bulk discount.
That's right. Save myself $12. I'm all about saving money.
Scott, real quick question, and I'm kind of diving into stuff right off the bat here, but it's kind of more of a general question about how sports work. How much does an impact, like you mentioned a team, like whoever loses this game, how they recover? Does Vegas factor that in when you're looking at games and you're coming up with your lines? I mean, it's interesting because the more I talk to you, the more it's actually metric based, it's data based, it's data analysis. How much does an emotional loss like this affect a team? I mean, do you guys, when you're looking at games, do you take that into consideration?
I look, 95% of it to me is power ratings and the adjustments made off the last game. There's some thought that goes into it about, boy, is this team going to be in letdown mode? Let's say Colorado loses. Are they going to be in letdown mode next week? Will Nebraska have the same energy that we saw last week? Will the home crowd be as ecstatic as they were last week if they lose this game? But again, it's like 95% power ratings, and I rarely have a power rating that moves more than half a point off a game. Now, if one of these two teams comes out and just is flat, lays an egg, gets beat by 3 or 4 touchdowns, never in the game, you might early in the season make a little bit more of an adjustment than half a point. So, but again, it's like I try not to guess what's going on between the guys' heads, and I've been that way since I started doing this. It's like, they talk about sandwich spots, Team A is playing their biggest 2 games surrounded against, a game against Texas El Paso. So they'll have a letdown against El Paso. Well, if you look it up over the course of history, you're going to see that it's about 50-50 when it comes to beating the spread. So I'm power ratings, I'm metrics, I'm all that kind of stuff more than anything else.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that was just kind of a random. I'm having that thought, and it's one of those. Okay, well, how does that actually figure in when you look at it statistically? Does it make a difference? And it sounds like it really doesn't.
It's kind of like this. And if you look at the 70s, right? Just take Nebraska, for example. I remember for many years in the 70s or maybe the early 80s, it seemed like Nebraska was always playing Iowa State the week before Oklahoma. And they would win those games 52-10, 49-14. There was a couple losses along the way. There was no letdown. It was almost like we're ready a week early for what we got to do. Now, they would turn around and lose to Oklahoma most of those years in the 70s. But the bottom line is, it's like people, I think, get too caught up into what they think the emotion of the players should be based off of what happened the previous week. And here's what I say, and we're going to see Dr. Rob's head kind of like do this now. But what I like to say is we think those things because we are not created equally. All right. These guys that are playing major college football, they've got a little bit different thing going on between their ears. And that's a positive thing. They've hit the genetic lottery. Most of them have been so focused on what it takes to bring out their best performance each week, whether they do or not, that those little things, I don't think, seep into the mindset, at least not for too long. Maybe you're all fired up at the start of the game, but after kickoff, doesn't that kind of go away, or maybe a series or two? So I'm all about trying to judge things as closely as possible to how the player thinks or would think for everything they've gone through to get where they are, as opposed to where I think, and having never played major college football. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm handicapping these games and looking for emotional positions or spots.
And you've been doing it coming up on 40 years, so this is how you make money. So you got to be pretty keened into it. Speaking of making money, we're going to try to make you a little money this week. Of course, this is for entertainment purposes only. We like to have a little fun here, but here are the games we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to start with the National Football League. This will be week 1 in the National Football League. We're going to take a look at the Sunday night game between the Rams and the Lions, and then we're going to move into college football. And there's been a lot of fluctuation with this line starting at the beginning of the year and then following last week's performances by both Texas and Michigan. That game's going to be in Ann Arbor. And then the rivalry game, the Cyhawk game. Iowa State takes on Iowa. I know Scott's got the over in both the win totals for the Cyclones and the Hawkeyes, but who's going to win this one straight up, or who's going to cover the spread? We'll take a look at that, and then we'll finally finish up with Nebraska and Colorado. If you want to work with Scott Spreitzer all season long, you can do so. Just text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit DocSports.com. That's DocSports.com, and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left side of the website. And of course, this is an interactive show. You can leave your comments. Lots of comments coming in right now, but we can also call the show, because this is a live call-in show, 402-543-5556. It's 543-5556. Week 1 of the National Football League. We all love college football, right, Scott? But at the end of the day, the NFL is king, and that's the same in the betting world, correct?
Absolutely. NFL's king, and it's not even close. And as far as, when I look at pro football, I mean, it's become more and more of something that I love to bet on over the past 10 years. I wasn't as big in betting pro football 25 years ago when I started all this. It was 90% college football, 10% in the NFL. But I really enjoy pro football at this point in my life. I really do. And, we're looking at a great potential Sunday night football game, this week, guys, with that Rams-Detroit battle. So, and you can see the line there, Detroit laying 3.5 total in the low 50s. I think both of these teams got a really solid shot, not only to win their division, but to represent themselves in the NFC Championship this year. Detroit more than the Rams. In fact, I already bet Detroit to win their division this season, bet that about 6 weeks ago. But again, I like both of these teams. And if you look at what Detroit did last year, it was nothing fluky. I mean, the offensive line's one of the best in the NFL. Both sides of the line of scrimmage, the coaching staff has had an incredibly quiet off season. I love quiet off seasons from good and talented football teams that are coached well. I don't want to hear this guy hasn't signed, that guy hasn't signed, this guy's pissed off because he didn't get the length of contract he wants and all that. Stop that stuff, man. I want to hear nothing, but, I want to be able to hear a pin drop, and that's what you've heard out of the Lions this offseason. The receiving unit is incredible. Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, had him, by the way, at an over receiving total last year, and I think we cashed that like in week 13. But, Jared Goff, has St. Brown back to throw to. He's got Sam Laporta, the tight end, that probably doesn't get as much as he should.
From Iowa.
Iowa.
Tight end you.
Tight end you, absolutely. I should have mentioned that. I should have waited for you to say it. But, but anyway, listen, the one thing the caveat with Detroit is they need to play a little bit better with their corners. But I did think that they addressed that for the most part of the offseason. I do lean towards Detroit here. That half a point always scares you off a little bit at 3.5. But they scored 24 points on the Rams in the playoff win last year, 24-23 final. And that Rams defense was in better shape than this Rams defense is going into this season. I think the Rams will take a game or two to be able to reach where they want to be. Offensive, you don't have Aaron Donald anymore, for one thing. Offensively, that front five, that offensive line, they took some bumps and bruises in camp, and I think that's going to harm them a bit here. Also, you've got Matthew Stafford, who's been dealing with a hammy. That scares me a little bit for the Rams this week. 5-6 weeks into the season, the Rams might win a matchup like this with Detroit, but I think Detroit gets it done on Sunday night, guys.
Steve says, the wrong one. Here it is. Corey says, so you're saying the Lions have a chance?
More than 10 million to 1, that's for sure.
Wow.
This is one of the teams to beat, no doubt about it. And again, it's funny to say how well this organization is being run, because 5-6 years ago, they were a laughing stock. But you get a coach who comes in who all the players are able to relate to, but it's not just, I like playing for this guy. It's like, I go out and I do the right things for this guy when I'm on the field. It's not so much buddy. And I like that out of this coaching staff. The players are all in. Amon-Ra St. Brown is almost an impossible cover, no matter what kind of routes he decides to run. So I think this team has a very good shot. I bet them to win their division, and I think they'll be in the NFC Championship at the end of the year. So listen, wouldn't it be nice to see the Detroit Lions in a Super Bowl for once? I wouldn't mind.
You know what? I kind of agree with you. And did you guys see the Dan Campbell Applebees commercial today? It's classic.
I have not. I love Campbell, though.
Yeah, Campbell. I mean, it's different because you don't see a lot of NFL coaches doing this, but he's playing a waiter, right? And he takes his menu and he's talking to he sits down and he covers up his mouth and he's talking to but it's a good commercial. If you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, just search after the show Dan Campbell Applebee's commercial, and I think you guys will be very much impressed. Now that's a late game. That's a night game on Sunday. So what this question actually translates into college football and the National Football League. Does the time of day affect the line? Say a noon game versus a night game. That comes from James.
Okay, so this is an interesting question for me because I've got a huge opinion on this.
Okay, well, let's start with Scott.
Oh, okay.
You start, Scott, and then let's hear Rob's opinion.
I'll give you the nerdy geek answer, and then Rob can give us the jock answer, all right, the guy who played the game.
Okay.
The nerdy geek answer is the guy who handicaps the games. And there's been a really massive myth for many, many years that said in the NFL that West Coast teams cannot play on the Eastern Seaboard with that early start time. So me and a buddy of mine, 35-year database, looked it up. We ran the numbers going all the way back to 1980 at the time. It was up until about 2019. So from 1980 to 2019, the actual case is that the West Coast team covered the spread more on the East Coast than did the East Coast team. And if the West Coast team played on the East Coast 2 weeks in a row, it was a 70% cover. So that huge myth that sounds so logical when it comes to the biological clock and all that kind of stuff was nothing more than a myth. The funny thing is around 2017, 18, I started putting this out there on every show I did. We'd talk NFL, and I'd say it's nothing but a myth. Go on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, and say it's nothing but a myth. Here are the results. And yet people still to this day, well, they're a West Coast team playing on the East Coast, and it's 10 a.m. West Coast kickoff time. Didn't affect the outcome as far as the spread has been concerned. So that's the handicapper version of it. Can't wait to hear what Rob says from his version.
He changed your mind, didn't he?
Scott's saying the numbers.
Mind.
Scott is saying the numbers do add up, so I can't argue with it. The thing that was interesting to me. So, okay, 30 years since the 94 Colorado-Nebraska game. I talked to Colorado guys. They said that it was a very rare 11 a.m. game for Nebraska. So 11 a.m. Central Time, so that's 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Several of the Colorado players I knew pretty well, which I mean, kind of the goofy thing about this that I don't know if a lot of people really truly understand. We kind of know all each other, even pre-internet era, pre-cell phone, pre-social media. All of us that played for Nebraska, we knew half the guys on the Colorado team and were friends with those guys, wanted to beat their ass. It's kind of one of those, you don't lose to your little brother. It's that kind of mentality. We liked those guys. We played against those guys. So we talked with them every so often, and those guys said that early game time screwed them up. Now, the one thing I would say now, you talk about the NFL aspect. The one thing I would throw out there, and I don't have the numbers on it by each team in the league. I mean, this is a lot of data you'd have to track down. But when we played, so I was with the New York Giants. We had several West Coast games. I mean, we played Seattle a couple of times when I was in the league. We played San Fran in San Fran. The Arizona Cardinals were in our division. You had to play Arizona every year in Arizona because you did a home and away with everybody in the division. We would usually the NFL did a nice job of scheduling a lot of these games all together from a travel standpoint. So you would fly out to San Francisco and you would always spend a couple of days in San Fran before the game. It wasn't one of these you came out the night before and played the game the next day.
Right. So you were out there.
Yeah, you were out there a couple of days beforehand. You would find a local junior college D2, D3 school, and you'd go practice there for 2 or 3 days and then go play the game on their clock.
Well, and in the college game, Scott, I think actually like Cal and Stanford are going to do that when they go to the East Coast. They're actually going to go like 2 or 3 days earlier to get acclimated to the time change and not do what normal teams do, and that is show up the day before, do a walkthrough, and then play the game. They're going to go out there a couple days early. Yeah. What I'm surprised is when they have back-to-back East Coast games, they're going to fly back and then go back. So I wonder
if they're going to do that for because like the NFL's real good about, over the last several years now, not maybe in 1980 or 85, but nowadays, if a West Coast team has that rare back-to-back, 2 weeks in a row on the East Coast, if the Niners play at Miami this week and at the Falcons the next week, the Niners stay somewhere on the East Coast. They don't go home and then go back. And it'll be interesting to see if college football, like you just mentioned, these former Pac-12 teams.
And we did that as well. I mean, you would fly out and you would go play San Francisco, and then they would put that Arizona game right after that. Or you would go play Seattle, and then you'd head down and play Arizona the following week. You would never leave the West Coast. You would stay out there the whole time.
I can only tell you from my experience, having not played college football, but I can only tell you from my experience, I've flown from here to the Far East and Southeast Asia and been just as ready to party as I was when I left Las Vegas. So there you go.
Because it's in your Vegas blood. It's in your Vegas blood.
402 anyway, dude.
402-593-5556. If you got a question, Owen's in the other room. He's ready to answer your phone calls. Let's dive into the college game, shall we? First game up on the docket. It's going to be a good one. Texas looked good last week, taking on Michigan. I'm not sold on the Wolverines. Texas is a 7.5-point favorite. The over-under at about 42.5. Scott, there's been some fluctuation on this, correct?
There has been. It's been, if you want to go back to when the line first opened a couple months ago, it was 3.5. It was 5.5 before last week's games, and now it's 7, 7.5, 7.5, bouncing around. Most books at this point, as we cut this show, are sitting at 7.5. I thought the two most disappointing scores by teams that won their game last weekend, Michigan, of course, I thought that was the second most, eye-opening. And the number one most eye-opening was Oregon barely getting by Idaho 17-14 with about 6 minutes to go. They win by 10. That's another, analysis for another show. I think Oregon's going to have positive regression this week. I think Boise State's in a little bit of trouble. That Oregon total yardage and all that kind of stuff was so far ahead of what Idaho did. It was Dylan Gabriel goes 41 of 49 throws for about 400 yards in that game, yet somehow they only won by 10. As far as Michigan, it's 16-10 with about 6 minutes to go. They did not look impressive when it comes to the metrics or statistics against Fresno State. And I will say this about Fresno, they're going to be a decent football team this year. Their over-under wins projection, was pretty good, like 8.5 going into this season. So it's not like they played the worst team in the Mountain West Conference this year. And of course, they're brand new. They got a brand new coach. They've got a situation where they've got a new quarterback and some key players that are no longer on this team. So they only gained 18 first downs, 4.4 yards per play. The one thing I noticed last week, though, is that Khalil Mullins, he ran well for UM last week for the most part. I mean, they didn't throw well. Davis Warren finished with a 33 QBR. That's not going to get the job done. And what's scary about that, it was short dump-off stuff, and they were still struggling. 4.7 yards per pass. They got to shore that up. The one thing that worries me about Texas, I think this line is about, it was 5.5, 2 weeks ago. It's now 7.5. You've lost value if you believe in value and power ratings. There's a lot of pressure on Texas. Okay, Michigan, if they lose this game, and I think about this, but I really don't put it into my handicapping until maybe the next week. Michigan loses this game. It's like, all right, it's a rebuild kind of season. Nobody expected this team to vie for a national title with all the changes this year. If Texas loses this game, are you kidding me? I mean, they could still get to the playoffs and probably would, but
True.
This is a team that's being thought of as the Georgia Bulldogs, the Ohio State Buckeyes, Alabama, USC of the Vince Young days. That's what Texas of the Vince Young days where they played USC. Everybody's thinking about this for Texas right now. I think that number is just a little bit too big. I think Michigan's going to be able to slow them down with their defense and be able to run the football at Texas. This reminds me of the first couple of years of the Jim Harbaugh era. Run the football, play smash mouth football, let your defense control things. I think they're going to hang this number and keep it inside 7.5.
Corey, when it comes to betting, we offer a lot of advice. Corey says, I won't bet on Michigan and Texas because I hate them both more than any other college football team. I think that may be the case for a lot of teams, for a lot of bettors. Before we dive into the next game, we do get a question here from Dan. Could you mention the Arkansas-Oklahoma State matchup? Arkansas put up, over 70 points last week?
Yeah.
Of course, Bobby Petrino, now the offensive coordinator for Arkansas. Oklahoma State likes to score points. Any
Wait a
thoughts on
second.
that?
Petrino is the O coordinator
at
Arkansas.
You didn't know that?
How did I miss this?
The dude can sleep with a staffer, wreck a motorcycle, get fired, and get rehired. That would be like Nebraska rehiring.
But even the dynamic.
Oh, I know. Sam Pittman's
of
trying
coming
to keep his
back.
job.
Yeah, I mean,
Pittman's
but even the
trying to
dynamic is of coming back as a coordinator.
Well, is he that? Or was going to be? Well, he was going to be at UNLV, right, Scott? He was going to be at UNLV. Yes. And then he took the UNLV job, and like 2 days later, bolted Vegas and went back to Little Rock.
And we ain't complaining. He was going to be Barry Odom's. He was going to be Barry Odom's offensive coordinator, and he did. He took the job. He had an office on campus, and 24 hours later, he's taking the job with Arkansas. And Brennan Marion is going to be a head coach. Just remember that name, Brennan Marion. He's the OC for UNLV. He runs this go-go offense, and I like it. And there's no baggage.
They won big last week too, right?
Coach who's going to be a head coach soon.
And UNLV won big last week, if I'm not mistaken.
They went on the road and kicked the crap out of Houston, I'm happy to say. And it was never a game. I think the final was 27-7. It was a blowout that looked even bigger than the final margin of victory. They, got to a bowl game. Hey, man, when UNLV goes 9-5 and we're in a bowl game, I mean, we're like celebrating on the strip. It's like carrying the championship trophy down Las Vegas Boulevard.
And there's still 10,000 people at the game.
What's that?
And there'll still only be 10,000 people.
Well, they'll probably hit 30,000. Maybe not this week against Utah Tech, but they will when Syracuse comes to town. They'll get a few fans. But unfortunately, half of them will be from Syracuse. But anyway, as far as Oklahoma State and Arkansas, I like Okie State to win by 10 in this game, right around there. Listen, Oklahoma State, you got to give them credit, man. They go up against South Dakota State, who was looking for their, 30th straight win or whatever it was. Yeah. Oak State knocks them off and does so, pretty impressively, 44-20. And I know Arkansas put up those gaudy numbers and they scored 70. It was Pine Bluff. It's one of the worst FCS programs in college football. So I think you got to factor that into the equation. I don't think Oak State's going to, beat this team by 17, 20 points, but I think a 10-point win by the time it's said and done, and not going to be shocked if Mike Gundy is coaching in the 12-team playoffs at the end of the year.
All right, let's dive into the next game. We're going to look at the Iowa State-Iowa matchup. It's a Cy-Hawk showdown. Traditionally, these games are close. You go back to 2017, and really every game since, they've been close. No more than, I believe, 10 points, as few as a couple one-point games in there. Iowa is favored at home. This has gone up a little bit. That over-under, does another low-scoring game, Scott, at 35.
Yeah, and I might have sent you the wrong number there, Travis. I'll put it on me. It's actually 3. It was Iowa the favorite. It was actually 2.5 earlier today, and I've seen some 3s starting to pop up. And I was doing a show earlier today, actually, about this game, and I was saying at the time, I'm kind of surprised it hasn't gone up to 3 from 2.5. Well, now it has, just in the last couple of hours. It's almost every book that I'm looking at in front of me. I got about 25 books in front of me, and almost every one of them has it at 3 at this point. The problem with Iowa State, and I like this team this year. I played over 7.5 wins for Iowa State. I played over 8 wins with the Hawkeyes. There was an 8 at the Circa here in Las Vegas, and jumped on that. I love being on those flat, even numbers when you're playing over and under, especially an over. If it gets to 8, they don't win anymore, I get my money back. So I love that when a lot of books had 8.5. But when I look at this game this week, I think the most outstanding stat of the entire week was the fact that North Dakota had a 23-play, 12-plus minute drive in their game against Iowa State. 23 plays, 12-plus minutes, and UND is a top 25 FCS program. So is Illinois State, but Iowa really got it together in the second half. I mean, 40 points. I went back and I looked and I saw the first time since September 16th of last year that Iowa hit 40. They did that against Western Mich. It was their second time in 37 games that they got to 40. The previous time was October 1, 2021 against Maryland. But I looked at this year's results. I looked at last year's where they hit 40. And here's the difference. So last year, the Hawkeyes get 41 against Western Mich. Iowa had 387 yards on just 4.6 yards per play. This year, 40 points, almost 500 yards, 7 yards per play. Last year, Cade McNamara, 9 for 19, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. This year, 21 for 31, 251, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 6 yards per carry for the ground game. Tim Lester was one of the best hires in the offseason for any program. I love this guy. When he was at Western Mich, man, they were, top of college football, or not number 1 or number 2, but they were always top 30 or so in a lot of offensive metrics that I care about the most. Again, when he was out Western Mich, and even the 3 years that he was both the head coach and calling the plays. So great hire. I think Iowa's going to be too tough for Iowa State. Here's something to look at for the Cyclones. They went 4-0 last year when rushing for at least 150 yards. 6-1 when they gained 100 yards or more on the ground in their last 7. So if Iowa can slow down that Iowa State ground game, and I think they will, I think they get the job done. I'm a little bit concerned about the Cyclones defense getting banged up right now. The linebacking core took some hits last week.
Yeah, Caleb Bacon got hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
He's their best player. I mean, he's their best player on defense.
So I think Iowa wins this game by a touchdown to 10 points. Interesting note, the last 19 times these two teams have met, 17 went under the total. Now, the average total is like 39 points when it comes to these two teams combining. But again, 17 unders in those 19 games.
I thought the interesting stat about Iowa, Rob, first of all, they have the 40th ranked offense in the country right now, which you just give Tim Lester the Broyles Award for the assistant coach of the year, right?
Like that right there. You hit 40th in total 40th, offense. You're like,
and people are doing cartwheels. But Scott, you probably know this as well.
Right there.
McNamara had 3 touchdown passes. They all went to wide receivers.
Yeah.
Now that's a huge deal because the 3
usually they go to defensive backs.
Well, Iowa has more picks than they usually have a pick a game. They had one last week, but I think last year alone only 3 touchdowns to wide receivers, and in 2022 only 2 touchdowns to wide receivers. So in one game, they equaled last year's total season and surpassed the season before to wide receivers.
Maybe some of these guys who hit the portal wouldn't have left.
Yeah.
Well, true.
Yeah,
I'm just saying it's okay.
I don't disagree with you. You're talking Lester Johnson's kid, right?
That and a couple of other guys. Well, some of the guys left because they gambled.
They didn't call me. I'm just making that
I'm
clear.
going to hell for this. Okay, so here's my question: is Tim Lester's Iowa's next head coach?
Boy, that'd be a heck of a hire.
No, I think it's going to be. If he gets
they
to
go
pick
outside.
No, I don't think so. If he gets, if Kirk Ferentz was not on the sidelines this past week because he got suspended, right? I think Seth Wallace would be the coach in waiting.
Who is that?
I think he's their assistant head coach.
And coaches what?
God, is he special teams? I think.
Okay, well, if he's a special teams coach, props to him then.
But yeah, I personally, I'd like to see him go outside because we see what happens when you promote from within. It doesn't work so well.
That whole Tom Osborne hire, total flub up.
Well, it didn't work. Well, it worked with Frank, but it didn't work, right?
Yeah, it worked with Frank. What didn't work was hiring Steve Peterson.
Yes, and that's kind of an inside hire as well. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what Iowa does. Kirk's coming up on 70. This is his 26th, 27th season. That's a long time. We'll see how long he keeps going. We do. How
long does Matt Campbell stay at Iowa State?
You don't have to leave anymore. You don't have to leave anymore. I mean,
there's a good question.
I mean, he's had opportunities. Why leave Iowa State? You have a great administration. You have a decent NIL group in their NIL group. You have great facilities, and the truth is, you're only going to leave for what? A Bama, a Notre Dame, something like that. I mean, there's not a lot of other jobs that you would go up to over Iowa State. Iowa State's in a pretty good position right now. And I actually believe that the Iowa State game has playoff implications. Now, Scott may disagree with me, but I think it has playoff implications.
I agree across the board on that statement. Obviously, I like both of these teams. I just think Iowa State got dealt a tough hand by losing,
the best defenders.
Absolutely.
So they just got dealt a bad hand for this week. But Tim, I'm all about hire an offensive-minded head coach and then go find yourself a really good defensive coordinator. I don't like defensive-minded head coaches that really aren't that great when it comes to offensive, situations and clock management and all that. I want my guy focused on offense. That's why I'd go after, I'd give Lester the job, man. If Ferentz has 2 or 3 more years, I'm like, if I can keep Lester around that long, he might be wearing the headset on the sideline.
So Scott, here's a question for you. I mean, we got to get to the question here in just a second about Florida State.
Because your Knowles suck.
Oh man, they are not good. You talk about that in terms of the head coach being a defensive-minded guy versus an offensive-minded guy. How much control does a defense have over clock management, time management? I mean, I really don't think they do. I mean, if you're a head coach, clock management's got to be a thing.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to understand that. You got to understand the ins and outs so that you've got to understand how to work that. That's all offensive guys.
And I listen, a good example of a good offensive coach who's a quarterback whisperer who blew it again with clock management. I don't care what anybody says at the end of the first half, ended up not costing him. Lincoln Riley. I mean, USC against LSU at the end of the first half there. LSU's in field goal position. They're running the clock, going to kick a field goal, and you don't use your timeouts, and you got 3 of them. And you can have more than a minute left to go down the other way after they kick the field goal and you just let that clock continue to run. I mean, that's a coach who could be a 10, offensive-minded 10, and instead he's probably like an 8.5 because he always does something squirrely when it comes to game clock management. But I agree. I mean, I think it's all up to the offense. If you're plowing away and you're getting 4.5 yards per carry on average and you're able to hit your passes, go deep occasionally, you control the clock, not the defense.
So let's get to Krillin31's question. He wrote this in on YouTube. We're usually Nostradamus right around the second week of the season. We start throwing out.
Scott knows. That's why he's asking this question. Scott knows.
Scott knows everything. When's Norvell getting fired?
Second to last game of the season.
Wow. There it is.
I think he's going to get his walking papers unless he wins out. He'll get his walking papers before the final game, and he may stick around for one more game. I don't know that he will. Probably not. But, the crystal ball isn't fired up completely like it was with Wisconsin coaching a couple years ago. So we'll have to wait this one out.
That's like eerie still. Like I'm still one of those like.
That was strange. That was kind of strange. I get a message. I wake up like the next morning, the Monday morning after the weekend, after the show we did, and I got a message from Travis saying, dude, you got fired.
Yeah,
anyway, but I would say around the second to last game of the season, unless, he could fall apart now and that's it. But there's no excuse these two games. There was the excuse in the bowl game. Everybody left, and we all know what happened with, the quarterback situation, not able to play that last game, and we get it. They went up against Georgia. But these last two games, the way this offense has looked, they can't run block. They can't give enough time to DJ to be able to do his thing. And, at Oregon State, he actually played well, man. Play action, run first, play action. That was DJ's game. And they're just not setting him up with any kind of running game to be able to do things like that.
And, with the way the portal's set up now, and things may change within the portal, but you have to fire a coach mid to late season, right? You can't go till the end of the season because you're going to lose momentum as far as going to getting guys in the portal. So you have to fire guys early.
It's a great point. You do. You can't wait around till the season's over. You've got to make noise. You've got to be talking about who might be coaching next year if it's an exciting potential hire to get kids to come there.
Can't believe we're week 2. We're already talking about we're chopping guys off the block already. All right, let's go to our final game of the evening. This is the one a lot of people watching the show have been gearing up for. It's Colorado at Nebraska. If you have about $1,500 to $2,000, that may get you a ticket into the game. Deion Sanders being a little more low key heading into this game, but all eyes are going to be on Lincoln. NBC Saturday night, 6:30. Huskers a 7.5-point favorite. High point total on this at 59.
I've heard a lot of people talking in the last couple of days, doing videos and talking about this potential great game that's going to be a ratings bonanza. Deion brings in a ton of ratings, obviously, and gets a ton of money. Last year and this year, very few teams get as much money and as much excitement in these sports books as the Colorado Buffaloes, believe it or not, even after they went 4-8. So the ratings are going to be huge. As far as comparing last year to this year, I don't take what happened in last year's game hardly at all into this game. Jeff Sims was the QB, and, I hear he's a great guy, but he was the human turnover on the field. And, they were outscored 16-0 in points off of turnovers in a 36-14 game. And the defense wasn't bad through 2.5 quarters. The defense got very little help. They outrushed Colorado. I think it was 220-58 in that game. But, again, the turnovers killed this squad. So the scary thing, and I'm going to give reasons why I like and dislike both teams. The scary thing, if you're a Nebraska fan, you're the better team overall. And Matt Rule, I believe, is the better football coach than Deion Sanders. But Colorado has 3 superstars. And right now you have one budding superstar, that being Dylan Raiola. And I look at Dylan Raiola, and the hype is there. He's unbelievably smart. You can see gifted between the years. He's so cool under pressure, but he's a freshman. And arguably quarterback 1 in next spring's NFL draft is playing for the other team, Shedeur Sanders. And if you watch that game against North Dakota State, he was able to do almost whatever he wanted. Now, the thing about the Bison, and I get it, man, this is a very good FCS program, so no disrespect to them. Their speed level is not good on defense compared to FBS teams, and especially teams that have Travis Hunter to throw to. I'm spacing off the other Bond. They've got, other kids to throw to, where when you look at
Horn Jr.
Jim Horn, I'm sorry, it's Jim Horn.
Yeah.
So Jim Horn, and you don't have Xavier to have to worry about anymore, but Horn steps in opposite of Travis Hunter, and he becomes a tough cover. So Nebraska is much quicker than North Dakota State on defense. We do know that, but that's the caveat. You've got 3 superstars, including arguably the best football player in college football in Travis Hunter, one of the top 5. You could make that argument easily. As far as Colorado's concerned, didn't like the way they were coached for most of that game. And when they started to pull away, I was shocked that they kind of let North Dakota State get back in it. They almost won the game. They almost came back, had a chance to win. I said going into last week that I like Nebraska, but there's no way I'm laying 27.5 until this team proves they can cover big numbers. And they did. I got to say it again this week. Nebraska is the better team. I think they should win this game by a touchdown. But until they can prove that they can beat, let's call them a quality opponent because of the individual players that Colorado has, until they can do that by more than 7 points, how could I back them? I'm not going to take the points of the Buffs. I'm going to wimp out here and say it's a pass for me, Colorado and Nebraska. If I had to play this game, if you said, Scott, for your lungs, you got to do something, I might play Nebraska first quarter minus 1.5 points, I believe is what it is, first quarter. I think they come out fired up and all that kind of stuff. But I'm so concerned that Nebraska, even if they're playing their best, could be up 10 to 14 points, and then Shedeur starts doing his things, man. And if you don't get a pass rush on him, they got 8 sacks last year. If you don't get a pass rush on him, he there's just so many ways he can beat you, even if he's down 2 touchdowns early. I don't like the offensive line. It's better than last year's Colorado's, but it's still not that great. Nebraska plays their game, doesn't turn the ball over. They win the game by 7 to 10 points.
So I'm going to guess you're going to disagree with Steve's comment. He says if Dylan makes his reads, checks it down right, I think he has more skilled players at receiver and running backs than Sanders.
I think as a team, that's what I'm saying. As a team, Nebraska's better, got the better depth.
I thought Nebraska was a better team last year.
Oh, yeah. They
lost by 3 touchdowns.
Well, that's the thing. And they got to stay away from the turnovers. And so you've got these 3 great players, including Travis Hunter, including Shedeur, that we're going to be watching paying, getting paid to, well, they get paid to pay nowadays, all by the way. But I was going to say playing in the NFL next season, and Shedeur might be a starter in the NFL next season. I'm very high on Shedeur Sanders. That's what scares me. Nebraska's the better team. They got the better depth. They got the better coaching staff. This is a team that if they win this game, they could be undefeated, as everybody knows, looking at the schedule when they take on Ohio State.
If you want to get a breakdown of Shedeur Sanders, Dr. Rob did a Doc's Diagnosis presented by Centris Federal Credit Union on YouTube. Just go to the YouTube channel of Doc Talk Sports and a good diagnosis of Shedeur Sanders. I mean, the guy has eyes in the back of his head, can make a lot of plays.
The composure's there.
Yes.
The athletic ability's there. The accuracy is amazing.
Dylan Raiola might be a number 1, number 2, number 3 pick as a quarterback in a couple of years. But right now he's an 18, 19-year-old freshman. Shedeur Sanders is the potential number 1 pick in next year's NFL quarterback crop.
Not according to Don. He says Sanders is not an NFL quarterback.
Wow. Well, we'll disagree.
He's not your prototypical guy, but God, when you watch him, the accuracy's there. He puts the ball where it has to be.
I mean, I know the Colorado hate, but and I don't know if he's the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, but you have to recognize talent where talent's there, right? I mean, Travis Hunter might be the best all-around player in college football.
Sure.
And Shedeur Sanders is a good quarterback. I'm not going to sit here and bag on Colorado and say, well, nah, I don't know if they're that well coached. But all you have to do is watch Shedeur Sanders and some of the plays he makes. You go, oh, this guy's pretty
well. And he's not a prototypical NFL quarterback. He's not a 6'4", 230-pound classic.
Is anybody anymore, Rob? Is anybody? I mean, look at Patrick Mahomes. Is anybody anymore?
Yeah, no, not
Caleb
so much.
Williams, right?
He's the new style pro quarterback. I really think that, and for the last few years, and they don't beat North Dakota State last week without Shedeur Sanders. No. I mean, I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
I'd agree with you 100% as well. If you want to work with Scott all season long, and he's going to be with us all season long, he's kind enough to hang out with us because he likes us. That's right. He likes us. You can text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit docsports.com. And you got a lot of stuff up there on Doc Sports, right? I mean, you've got other videos and that stuff, but you can sign up for the free 60 on the upper left-hand side of the website. But you got a lot of stuff up there, right, Scott?
I do about 6 videos a week, 6 days a week during football and basketball season. Usually take maybe Tuesday off. But there's videos on there, and I'm talking about football plays and whatever season it is almost every night of the week. I wanted to say something before we go, though, because I'm a real big proponent of, hey, we can pat ourselves on the back when we win. You got to tell the story when you lose. And I lost last week. For those who did jump on board, I lost last Saturday. The clients lost. I was lucky enough with in-game betting to end up 7-7 and just lose a little bit of vig. The clients had a bad weekend for me last week in football. So we'll look to turn that around. It was like, Syracuse is the game that really cost me that last week. They were up 38-16 in the fourth quarter, laying 17, and they gave up a fourth quarter touchdown to get inside the number by a point, and they basically just ran the clock the rest of the way. Not trying to say that Syracuse was the right side and it got the wrong result, but they were up and covering that number in the fourth quarter, and that's just kind of what set it off. And so we're going to bounce back. We always do. We're hitting about 58% the last 600 plays.
That means you're making a boatload of money.
Saturdays.
That means you're making a boatload of money, because you told me to make good money, you got to hit like 53, 54%, right?
52.3% and 11 to win 10. 52.3% is break even. So most pros are going for that 55%. And we're all happy at the end of the year when we go 55%. And last week, well, I got some work to do. Let's just say that, because last week sucked.
Well, I tell you, if you have a good week, pool party at Scott's house next week. It was 105 in Vegas today, Rob. 105.
It's a dry heat.
It's a dry heat. You're right. It is a total dry heat.
Hey, man, our power bills are only $500 a month. So
are you serious?
Close to it.
You guys are running
$500 a month for power?
You guys run AC in December, don't you?
Almost. And I'm home. I work from home. So I only venture out when I have a radio show or TV show to do in a casino. And the air is on, and it's a 2-story house. You got 2 air conditioners. The air is running upstairs or downstairs 24/7 from basically March 1st until January 1st. So there you go.
Damn, $500 a month.
Almost.
You know what we like here in Nebraska? We like our power and we like our water. You have water problems? Lake Mead empty?
Actually, it's so much BS. Yeah. Well, I'll be here for the rest of my life, and my kid and her kids, if she wants them here too. There's so much water, a reservoir under the strip. They don't talk about this. I'll tell you real quickly. When they were building the stadium Allegiant for the Raiders to play in, they had to start over about 84,000 times because of water being in the way. So
really?
There's so much water under the strip and the reservoir and this whole Lake Mead scenario. Somebody's getting money somewhere. You know, you guys know how that goes.
Go figure. And it's Vegas, right? It's Vegas. Owen Justice was our producer tonight. He was answering the phone calls.
Thank you, Owen.
And remember, you can always call the show. We're going to be back next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. For Scott Spreitzer, he's Dr. Rob Zatechka. I'm Travis Justice. We'll talk to you next week on Behind the Point Spread.